Welcome to Workplace Psychology with Dr. Martha Grajdek. I'm Dr. Martha Grajdek. This podcast examines a wide variety of work-related issues through the lens of industrial and organizational psychology. And while many of the topics discussed here may be seen as intended for white-collar employees and their employers, in reality, the ideas presented here are applicable across organizations and industries. Additionally, many of the topics discussed here may be applicable outside of the workplace. I encourage you to examine what's presented here, apply what makes sense to you, and simply discard the rest.
Grief is a part of life, which means that at some point, grief will show up at the workplace. This is a simple reality of life. Whether or not a company has the right policies or any policies in place to handle and deal with grief when it makes an appearance, it's a matter of time before it does make an appearance. So companies will do well to be prepared to be able to adequately deal with grief as it becomes a reality of someone's life. Grief can pertain to individual circumstances of individual employees, or it may have something to do collectively with the organization or the community. The bottom line is that grief is real and it's bound to become an experience for someone or maybe for multiple people at the same time within the organization. It's absolutely critical that organizations have policies in place of how to handle the experience of grief, and these policies should be well thought out and well written so that they are actually helpful. Many of them, unfortunately, aren't helpful at all, and some of them actually are harmful in their nature. Let's talk about grief and the workplace. When someone experiences grief, whether that's on an individual level or collectively, it can affect one's workplace experience. It can affect one's performance, from the ability to concentrate to the ability to show up, and everything else in between. Different people deal with grief differently. It's important to know that and to recognize that. All too often, if an organization has some kind of a policy in place to be able to deal with an individual's grief, it's very vague and it's very heavily shifted onto the individual. It could be something as simple as allowing the person to take a certain amount of time off, but then they are left to figure everything else out on their own. And while that's an attempt, it's not always effective and can sometimes seem more detrimental than it actually could be helpful. Grief can be the result of many different things, whether it's a loss in form of a death, fertility loss, caregiver issues, a health diagnosis, a health crisis, community issues or a community crisis, a divorce. There are many different ways, many different things and circumstances that can bring grief or cause grief in an individual's experience in their life. Grief can also affect groups of people and communities of people. And as I already mentioned, everything from inability to concentrate to poor performance, lack of motivation, forgetfulness, irritability, or simply being withdrawn. Grief can come across or look like many different things because different people handle grief differently. Different people deal with grief differently. This is why a company must be aware of that and must be prepared to do what it can in order to actually be helpful. Some of the worst ways that an organization can attempt to deal with a person's grief or a number of people's grief, a group of people's grief, is to minimize it or push it aside or advise them to just keep busy or push through it and give meaningless advice. Not only is it ineffective and insincere, it can actually be harmful. Instead, the organization should focus on the kind of support that is actually helpful. And again, keep in mind that everybody is not the same in how they deal with grief and how grief will manifest itself in their experience and their behaviors, how they react to it. So although this is a little more work, the organization absolutely must aim to be actually helpful to every individual. Does it mean that it has to tailor its policy to every single employee? No, but also yes, to some degree. While policies tend to be broader in nature, there has to be room for individualized approach, for an individualized response. An organization absolutely has to make sure that its leadership and management know how to approach this issue properly. Provide your managers with training. Give them scripts so that they know what compassionate exchanges look like, what a compassionate approach, what a compassionate check-in with an employee actually looks like, what it should look like, what it should be like for the employee to experience. And while we're not asking managers to be therapists, there has to be a certain skill level that comes with the responsibility of being in a management position. So focus on compassionate and appropriate check-ins, regular check-ins with those who are experiencing grief. There has to be an expectation reset. A person who's experiencing grief may not be able to carry the same workload or keep the same schedule. The manager has to be aware of what the employee needs and be able to accommodate that as much as possible. And how do you know what the employee needs? Ask them, talk to them, listen when they speak. Sometimes you have to listen to hints or look for clues between the lines, because not everybody feels comfortable to simply state what it is they need. Giving people 3 days off to attend a funeral is not the end of their grief. And an organization absolutely needs to know that and needs to operate in a way that allows the person to grieve after whatever initial response from the organization. So flexible schedules, flexible workloads, responsibility or expectation resets, those are a must. Make sure that you have options for employees, whether that's options to seek therapy, support groups, or any other benefits. And keep in mind that anonymity is very important. If an employee is to feel comfortable choosing some kind of help that the organization is able to provide, they should be able to do that on their own terms and anonymously if they want to. That means that everyone in their department or everybody else in the company or other employees or other managers don't need to know all of their business. Many people will choose to forgo the available help because they don't want their business to be known by everybody. So an organization absolutely has to be aware of that and be sensitive to that. Support has to also respect people's privacy. Beyond that, there has to be coverage planning. and it should not be left onto the individual to figure out who's going to cover their responsibilities if they're unable to, whether they need some time off or they're simply unable to meet their responsibilities at this time. The organization should have a backup plan. Don't make that the employee's responsibility. If an employee is working at a reduced capacity or perhaps is absent for a certain amount of time, the organization must also have a plan in place for the reintegration of that individual. How will the person rejoin the team? How will they come back to where they were before whatever event happened in their life that caused this grief? How will they get back to a place where they're closer to where they were? Or an even better goal is, how can you help them to not only reintegrate, but get ahead and be better where they were before something happened? That's a truly supportive organization. It's one thing to be able to help the employee to reintegrate and come back to work as they were before, and that's great. That's important. But it's a whole other level of support when the organization gives the employee an opportunity of growth, personal or otherwise, as a result of having dealt with something big in their life. I bring this up because just as people are often encouraged as individuals to do better than they did before, so should organizations. Status quo should never be the steady answer or the forever answer for organizations. Organizations should aim to be better too. And how you support your employees as an organization is just one more example of how the organization can improve. When it comes to organizations that truly are helpful to people, be it individuals or groups, of how to handle grief, how to deal with grief, the organizations that take the time to train their managers and those in leadership positions will be ahead of everyone else. Make sure that your managers and those in leadership positions have the proper training and have a reference guide. Don't send them to one training and hope that they remember what they learned. Let them have something to reference for those difficult times. Helping people to deal with grief hopefully doesn't happen very often, but when it does, a manager should not be fumbling about trying to remember their training. Make sure they have a reference of what to do. It can be a simple one-page guide for managers to be effective when grief enters the scene. Remember, compassionate and appropriate check-ins. That's an important start. The other big part of it is benefits. What benefits are available to the employee, whether that means counseling or therapy, time off, flexible schedules, or flexible responsibilities. All of those things should be at the manager's fingertips so that they can then have a meaningful exchange and be actually supportive to the individual who needs it the most when they need it the most. As this episode comes to an end, let's review what was discussed. Grief is a part of life, and therefore grief is part of the work life. Organizations will do well to have effective policies in place, policies that are actually helpful when people experience grief in their lives. Grief can come from many different things and can affect people differently. This is why it's so important to be able to have an individualized approach that transcends any general policy. Training managers is key, as they will most likely be the first or the most frequent contact for the individual employee who is experiencing grief. Being able to offer things such as time off or adjustments in schedule and responsibilities can make all the difference to the individual employee. And don't forget that having a plan for reintegration is just as important. As the week unfolds, I encourage all of you to think about grief and how it's handled by your company. Whether or not you are in a management or leadership position, you likely have some idea of what the company's response is when someone experiences grief in their life. This is an opportunity for conversations to start if clarification is needed and if improvement is in order. Why not take some time to consider how your company responds to grief and how helpful it is to individuals who experience it? For those of you who experience this podcast in an audio-only version, I encourage you to check out my YouTube channel, Stress Free with Dr. G, where you can find the video version of the podcast. While you're there, check out some of the other videos. They focus on stress management. Stress Free with Dr. G is available on YouTube, and the link for that is in the description below. Thank you for joining me today. Please subscribe to this podcast. I look forward to seeing you here again next time. Until then, I wish you joy and well-being.